A boy keeps drawing pictures of a strange man in his school. When the teacher recognizes the face, she breaks down in tears. Sarah Anderson stood at her classroom window, watching the autumn leaves scatter across Riverside Elementary's playground. The morning sun cast long shadows across the freshly painted hopscotch squares, and a crisp October breeze rustled through the maple trees that lined the fence. After 16 years of teaching third grade in this same classroom, she had developed an almost maternal sixth sense about her students, which made her current concern all the more pressing. Her eyes fixed on a small figure sitting alone at one of the wooden picnic tables. Michael Collins, her newest student, hunched over his sketchbook with the same intense concentration he'd shown every recess for the past 3 weeks. His dark brown hair fell forward over his eyes as his pencil moved across the paper with surprising precision for an 8-year-old. "Still at it, huh?" Karen Mitchell, the 4th grade teacher from next door, appeared beside Sarah, coffee mug in hand. "Every day," Sarah replied, absently twisting the silver pendant she always wore. "I've never seen a child so dedicated to drawing, or so consistent with his subject matter." "What do you mean?" Sarah crossed her arms, a habit she'd developed when something troubled her. "It's always the same figure. A man in a fedora standing by the fence. The details never change, the way he stands, the coat, the hat. It's almost like he's drawing from life?" Karen suggested, raising an eyebrow. "That's just it." Sarah turned from the window, walking to her desk where she'd kept a folder of Michael's drawings. Each one had been left behind after class, some crumpled, others carefully torn from his notebook. She spread them out on her desk. Karen set down her coffee and picked up one of the sketches. For a child's drawing, the detail was remarkable. The figure was tall and lean, wearing a dark coat that reached his knees and a fedora that cast a shadow over his face. His hands were always in his pockets, and he stood in the same pose, slightly turned to the side, as if watching something out of frame. "Have you talked to his mother about it?" Karen asked, comparing 2 of the drawings. "Parent-teacher conferences aren't until next month." "But," Sarah hesitated. "I did call her last week. She said Michael's always been artistic, especially since the divorce. She thinks it's just his way of processing things." The recess bell rang, and through the window, they could see Michael carefully closing his sketchbook. Unlike the other children who ran back to the building in noisy clusters, he walked alone, his eyes downcast. "Good morning, Michael," Sarah said warmly as he entered the classroom. He gave her a slight smile, the kind that didn't quite reach his eyes, and slipped into his seat in the second row. As Sarah began her lesson on multiplication tables, she noticed Michael's hand moving under his desk. She knew he was drawing again, but chose not to call attention to it. Instead, she watched as his eyes occasionally drifted to the window, then back to whatever he was sketching. During lunch period, after the children had filed out to the cafeteria, Sarah found herself drawn to Michael's desk. A corner of paper stuck out from under his mathematics workbook. She hesitated, then gently pulled it free. This drawing was different. The man was in his usual pose, but Michael had added more detail to the background. The playground fence was clearly depicted, and behind it, partially hidden by shrubs, was what appeared to be a gardening cart or wheelbarrow. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. She walked to the window and looked out at the playground. The maintenance staff had recently begun their fall landscaping work. A wheelbarrow stood abandoned by the fence, half filled with dead leaves. That afternoon, as the children packed up their bags, Sarah noticed Michael lingering at his desk. "Michael," she called softly, "is everything all right?" He looked up, his blue eyes serious. "Ms. Anderson? Do you ever see him?" "See who, Michael?" He glanced at the window, then back at her. "The man who watches us play. He's always there, but nobody else looks at him." Without waiting for her response, he shouldered his backpack and hurried out the door. Sarah stood at her desk long after the last bus had departed. She gathered Michael's drawings and added the new one to her folder. Something about the precision of the details, the consistency of the figure, nagged at her consciousness. As she prepared to leave, movement caught her eye through the window. A tall figure was walking along the fence line, pushing a wheelbarrow. He wore maintenance coveralls and a wide-brimmed hat against the late afternoon sun. She watched until he disappeared around the corner of the building, then opened her laptop. Perhaps it was time to look into the maintenance staff schedules and run some background checks. As she began typing, a long-forgotten memory stirred, something about a man in a hat from her first year of teaching, something she'd tried very hard to forget. The fluorescent lights of Riverside Elementary's teacher's lounge hummed quietly as Sarah stared at her laptop screen. It was nearly 6 in the evening, long after most staff had left, but sleep had been elusive lately, and she found herself staying later each day, searching. On her screen was a decade-old news article from the Boston Globe. 5th child missing in countywide investigation. The photo showed grieving parents, police tape, and a school building that could have been any one of dozens in Massachusetts. Sarah remembered that time all too well, her first year of teaching, when fear had gripped every school in the county. "You're here late," Sarah startled, closing her laptop reflexively. Jenny Martinez, the school counselor, stood in the doorway with a concerned expression. "Just doing some research," Sarah said, rubbing her eyes. "Have you had a chance to observe Michael Collins in class?" Jenny pulled up a chair, her bronze bangles jingling softly. "I have. Quiet boy, very focused. His art teacher says he's remarkably talented for his age." She paused. "You're worried about the drawings." Sarah reopened her laptop, turning it to show Jenny the article. "Do you remember this? 10 years ago, 5 children disappeared from different schools across the county. 8 months, 5 kids, no bodies ever found. I wasn't in the area then," Jenny said, scanning the article. "But I've heard about it. They never caught anyone?" "No." Sarah pulled out her folder of Michael's drawings. But there was a witness description that kept coming up. A tall man in a dark coat and fedora, seen near each school before the disappearances. She spread out Michael's sketches. "Look familiar?" Jenny studied the drawings, her forehead creasing. "Sarah, you can't seriously think—" "I know how it sounds," Sarah interrupted. "But look at this one." She pointed to the most recent drawing, the one with the wheelbarrow. "Michael drew this yesterday morning. The wheelbarrow appeared in the afternoon. He couldn't have seen it before drawing it." "Children have active imaginations," Jenny said gently, "and they notice things adults miss. Maybe he saw the maintenance staff preparing for yard work." Sarah shook her head. "It's more than that. Yesterday he asked me if I could see the man who watches them play. He said, 'Nobody else looks at him.' Those were his exact words." Jenny was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Have you seen anyone suspicious?" "I've seen our new groundskeeper wearing a hat while working, but it's not unusual for maintenance staff to wear hats in the sun." Sarah pulled up another file on her laptop. "I've been looking into the school's maintenance records from 10 years ago. 3 of the 5 schools where children disappeared had recently hired new maintenance staff before the incidents. And Riverside? Our records from that period are incomplete. There was a fire in the administrative building in 2015, and a lot of personnel files were lost." Sarah closed her laptop again. "But I remember something from my first year. There was a maintenance worker who used to wave to my class during recess. He disappeared around the same time as the last child. I never made the connection until now." Jenny leaned back, her professional demeanor softening. "Sarah, I know that first year was traumatic for everyone in the area, but we have to be careful not to see patterns where there might not be any." "I know." Sarah gathered Michael's drawings back into their folder. "But I can't shake the feeling that we're missing something important. These drawings, they're too specific, too consistent." A sudden bang from the hallway made both women jump. Through the lounge window, they saw the evening janitor with his cart, apologetically waving after knocking over a trash can. "Listen," Jenny said, standing up. "Let me spend some time with Michael tomorrow. I'll observe him during recess, maybe have a chat with him. And I think you should talk to David." "Officer Chan? You think this warrants police involvement?" "David's been our resource officer for 5 years. If anyone knows the comings and goings around this school, it's him. At the very least, he can look into the new maintenance staff's background checks." Sarah nodded, gathering her things. As they walked to the parking lot together, the setting sun cast long shadows across the playground. She couldn't help but notice how the evening light transformed familiar shapes into looming figures, how easily a child's imagination could turn ordinary shadows into watching eyes. But as she got into her car, Sarah couldn't shake one persistent thought. Sometimes, what appears to be imagination is actually observation. And sometimes, the monsters that children see are hiding in plain sight. The next morning arrived with a heavy blanket of fog that clung to Riverside Elementary's grounds. Sarah sat in her parked car, earlier than usual, watching the maintenance staff prepare for the day. A figure in dark coveralls pushed a cart along the fence line, disappearing and reappearing through the mist like a ghost. Inside her classroom, Sarah found a new drawing on her desk. Her heart skipped a beat. She always locked her door at night. She picked up the paper with trembling hands. The man in the fedora was there as always, but this time he held something in his hand. A ring of keys. A knock at her door made her jump. "Morning," Officer David Chun said, poking his head in. At 45, with salt and pepper hair and laugh lines around his eyes, he had a way of making everyone feel at ease. "Jenny mentioned you wanted to talk?" Sarah showed him the drawing. "This wasn't here when I left last night." David examined the paper carefully. "You're sure?" "Positive. I always clear my desk before leaving." He pulled out his phone and took a photo. "The janitor has a master key. Let me check who was on duty last night." He paused, studying the drawing more closely. "Jenny mentioned your concerns about the similarities to the old cases." Sarah pulled out her folder of Michael's drawings. As she spread them across her desk, early morning light filtered through the fog outside, casting a gray pallor over the papers. "Look at the consistency," she said. "The stance, the coat, the hat. And now this." She pointed to the keys in the latest drawing. David frowned. "I'll look into our maintenance staff's access privileges." "When does Michael usually draw these?" "During recess. He sits at the picnic table near the old oak tree." "Mind if I observe today?" The morning passed with agonizing slowness. Sarah found herself watching the clock, her lesson on fractions feeling mechanical and distant. Michael sat quietly in his usual spot, his pencil moving beneath his desk even as he appeared to pay attention. When the recess bell rang, David was already positioned near the playground equipment, trying to look casual as he scanned the area. Sarah stood at her usual spot by the window, heart pounding as she watched Michael take his place at the picnic table. Through the playground's chain-link fence, she could see someone working in the grounds beyond, the same figure she'd noticed in the fog that morning. As she watched, he stopped his work and stood still, facing the playground. Sarah's hand went to her throat. The man's stance was identical to the one in Michael's drawings. She hurried outside, the cool October air biting at her cheeks. As she approached Michael's table, she saw his latest drawing taking shape. The man by the fence, but this time he wasn't alone. In the drawing, he was talking to another figure, one wearing what looked like a police uniform. Sarah's head snapped up. Through the fence, she could see the maintenance worker engaged in conversation with Officer Chun. "Michael," she said softly, trying to keep her voice steady. "The man you draw, is that him?" The maintenance worker. Michael didn't look up from his drawing. "He has different faces," he said, continuing to sketch. "Sometimes he's the grass man. Sometimes he's the night man. But he's always watching." A chill ran down Sarah's spine. "The night man?" Michael nodded, adding detail to the police officer's badge in his drawing. "He comes when everyone's gone. I saw him from Mom's car when she picked me up late yesterday. He has keys that open all the doors." Sarah looked back toward the fence, but both David and the maintenance worker had disappeared. In the distance, she could hear the rumble of a lawn mower starting up. Later that afternoon, David appeared at her classroom door again. The children were at music class, giving them privacy to talk. "His name is Richard Hayes," David said, closing the door behind him. "Started working here 2 months ago. Background check was clean, but..." He hesitated. "There's something odd. I can't find any employment history before 2015. It's like he didn't exist. Sarah felt her mouth go dry. The same year our personnel records were lost in the fire. David nodded grimly. I'm running his prints through the system. And Sarah? He pulled out his phone, showing her a photo. This was just sent over from Burlington Elementary. One of their students drew this last week. Sarah's hands shook as she looked at the photo. The drawing showed a man in a fedora, standing by a fence. The style was different, but the details, the stance, the coat, the hat were exactly the same as Michael's drawings. Burlington's about 20 miles from here, David said quietly. They just hired a new part-time groundskeeper. Want to guess his name? Outside, the fog had lifted, but Sarah felt a new darkness descending. As she watched her students return from music class, Michael among them, she realized that the shadows of the past weren't just memories anymore. They were taking shape in the present, drawn by the innocent hands of children who saw what the adults had missed for so long. Detective Lisa Reeves sat in her cramped office at the Burlington Police Department, surrounded by stacks of files and photographs. The wall behind her desk had become a maze of red strings connecting photos, employment records, and children's drawings from various schools. At the center was a sketch, the one from Burlington Elementary that had started her newest investigation. Her cell phone buzzed. Reeves, Detective, Officer Chen's voice crackled through. We need to talk about Richard Hayes. 30 minutes later, Sarah Anderson sat across from Detective Reeves, watching as the detective added Michael's drawings to her wall of evidence. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the office, making the red strings look like trails of blood. 5 schools in 3 months, Reeves said, stepping back from the wall. All hiring the same man under slightly different names. Richard Hayes, Richard Hayworth, Richard Henderson. Always keeping the first name, always working part-time maintenance or groundskeeping, Sarah studied the pattern of strings. And the drawings? 3 different schools, 3 different children. Reeves pointed to each sketch. Burlington, Riverside, and now Oak Ridge Elementary. All showing the same figure, same pose, same hat. None of the children know each other. Officer Chun leaned against the doorframe. The prints came back clean. Too clean. What do you mean? Sarah asked. No records before 2015. Not even a driver's license. He handed Reeves a folder. But I found something interesting in the old case files. One of the maintenance workers interviewed during the original investigation, a Richard Harrison. He worked at 2 of the schools where children disappeared. Left town right after the last disappearance. Reeves pinned a new photo to the wall, a grainy security camera image from 2015. This was taken at Maple Grove Elementary, 3 days before the last child vanished. Look at his stance. Sarah felt her blood run cold. The man in the photo stood exactly as Michael had drawn him, slightly turned, hands in pockets, fedora casting a shadow over his face. He's been hiding in plain sight, Reeves said, connecting more strings. Taking maintenance jobs at schools, probably using the time to learn routines, security patterns. The hat and coat aren't just a signature, they're camouflage. Maintenance workers are invisible to most people, but not to children, Sarah added quietly. They notice everything. The detective nodded. Exactly. And now he's back using the same method. Different names, different schools, but the same pattern. Why now? Chen asked. Why return after 10 years? Because enough time has passed, Reeves replied. Old staff have retired, new security measures have gotten lax, and most importantly, people have started to forget. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Jenny Martinez. Michael drew something new. You need to see this. 20 minutes later, they were back at Riverside Elementary. Jenny met them in Sarah's classroom, holding a large piece of paper. Michael's latest drawing showed the man in the fedora, but this time he was standing next to a van. The license plate was drawn with remarkable detail. He saw this today? Reeves asked, photographing the drawing. Jenny nodded. During afternoon recess, said the man was putting tools in his van. Chun was already on his phone. Running the plate now. A pause. Registered to a Richard Henderson. Address in Lakeville. That's halfway between our schools, Reeves said. Perfect central location. She turned to Sarah. We need to move carefully. If he suspects we're onto him, he'll disappear again, Sarah finished. Like last time, as if on cue, they heard the distant rumble of a van starting up in the staff parking lot. Chun rushed to the window just in time to see a white van pulling away from the school. I want surveillance on that address in Lakeville, Reeves ordered, already heading for the door. And I want background checks on every maintenance worker hired in the county in the past 6 months. After they left, Sarah stood at her classroom window, watching the empty playground where Michael had made his crucial observation. The late afternoon sun stretched the shadows of the playground equipment across the asphalt, creating dark shapes that seemed to reach toward the school like grasping fingers. She thought about Michael, about his quiet attention to detail, about how children see what adults train themselves to ignore. Tomorrow, Hayes, or whatever his real name was, would return as usual, pretending to trim hedges and rake leaves. But now they would be watching him just as carefully as he had been watching them. The question was, could they catch him before he realized he'd been noticed by the very children he thought he was invisibly observing? The maintenance shed at Riverside Elementary stood in the far corner of the property, a weathered building that had witnessed decades of school history. On this particular morning, Richard Hayes organized his tools with methodical precision, each item arranged exactly as it had been the day before. Sarah watched from her classroom window as he emerged, pushing his wheelbarrow with deliberate steps. Today was different. Today she noticed how he subtly altered his path to pass by the playground, how his head turned slightly to scan the area, how he lingered just a moment too long near the fence. Ms. Anderson? Michael's voice pulled her attention back to the classroom. He stood at her desk, another drawing in his hand. He's different today. The drawing showed the man in the fedora, but his posture had changed. Instead of the usual stance, he was crouching, as if hiding behind the shrubs. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. Different how, Michael? He knows we see him, Michael said simply, then returned to his seat. Detective Reeves had positioned plainclothes officers around the school perimeter, but Hayes showed no sign of awareness. He worked methodically, trimming hedges with practiced efficiency, occasionally stopping to make notes in a small notebook he carried. During morning recess, Sarah sat with Jenny at the picnic tables, trying to appear casual while watching Hayes work. Michael sat nearby, drawing as usual. Notice anything? Jenny asked quietly. He's documenting something, Sarah replied, pretending to grade papers. Every few minutes, he writes in that notebook. Through her peripheral vision, she saw Hayes check his watch, make another note, then move to a new position, one that gave him a clear view of the playground entrance. Officer Chun appeared beside their table, wearing civilian clothes. We've got surveillance photos from his house in Lakeville, he said softly. Detective Reeves is reviewing them now. You should see this. He slid a phone across the table. The photo showed Hayes's garage wall covered in maps, detailed layouts of various schools in the county, each marked with colored pins and notes. Those aren't just maps, Sarah whispered. They're escape routes. Look at how he's marked the access roads, the less monitored areas. A shadow fell across their table. Hayes stood nearby, pruning shears in hand, adjusting his hat against the sun. Morning, he said pleasantly. Lovely day for the children to be out. His voice was smooth, unremarkable, the kind that wouldn't stand out in memory. But something in his eyes made Sarah's skin crawl. They were too alert, too calculating behind their friendly facade. Indeed it is, Jenny replied with a forced smile. Hayes glanced at Michael's drawing, and for a moment, his pleasant mask slipped. Something dark flickered across his features before he turned away, pushing his wheelbarrow toward the shed. Later that afternoon, Sarah received an urgent text from Reeves. Found something. Meeting at station, 6 p.m. The evidence room at the Burlington Police Department was crowded with detectives and analysts when Sarah arrived. Reeves stood before a board covered in new photographs. We searched his van, she announced without preamble. Found these hidden under the spare tire. She pointed to photographs spread across the table, surveillance photos of different schools, children at play, detailed notes about schedules and security patterns. But this is what concerns me most. She held up Hayes's notebook, recovered from his workbench. It's all here, every security guard's rotation, every teacher's schedule, every camera's blind spot. He's been planning this for months. There's more, Chen added. We found old newspapers in his garage. Articles about the disappearances from 10 years ago. He's been keeping them like trophies. Sarah studied the photographs, her teachers noting details others might miss. These recent photos, they're all of children who stay late after school. The ones whose parents work longer hours. Vulnerable targets, Reeves confirmed grimly. Just like last time. But we can't arrest him yet, Chen said, frustration evident in his voice. We don't have enough to hold him. These photos, while suspicious, aren't illegal. The maps could be explained away as part of his job. So we watch him, Reeves replied, and we wait for him to make a mistake. Because people like Hayes, they always make mistakes. Their confidence grows, they get sloppy. As Sarah drove home that night, she thought about Michael's latest drawing, the man crouching, hiding, aware he was being watched. Somehow, the child had sensed the change in Hayes before any of them. Tomorrow, Hayes would return to his routine, unaware that his every move was now being documented as meticulously as he had documented others. But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. Because if Michael was right, if Hayes knew he'd been noticed, then he might decide to act sooner rather than later. And this time, they couldn't afford to let him disappear again. Detective Reeves sat at her desk at 3 a.m., surrounded by 10 years' worth of evidence. Her computer screen glowed with employment records from various school districts, while her desk was covered with photographs, both old and new. She rubbed her tired eyes, then reached for her now cold coffee. A pattern was emerging, but it was like looking at a constellation. The stars only formed a picture if you knew how to connect them. Her phone buzzed. A text from the surveillance team at Hayes' house. Subject leaving residence. 3:12 a.m. She immediately dialed Chen. He's moving. Where's he supposed to be working today? Riverside in the morning, then Oak Ridge Elementary in the afternoon. Chen replied, sounding fully awake despite the hour. But if he's out this early, he's doing something else, Reeves finished. Get a team to follow him, but at a distance. He's been doing this too long to not notice a tail. The next few hours revealed a disturbing pattern. Hayes drove to 5 different schools in the county, spending exactly 12 minutes at each one, always parking in spots hidden from security cameras. At each location, he walked the perimeter, taking notes and occasionally photographing entry points. By the time Sarah arrived at Riverside Elementary that morning, Hayes was already there, working on the grounds as if he hadn't spent the pre-dawn hours conducting surveillance of other schools. He's planning multiple sites, Reeves told Sarah during their hurried meeting in the teacher's lounge. Just like last time, he doesn't want to hit the same area twice. It spreads out the investigation, makes it harder to connect the dots. Sarah watched through the window as Hayes trimmed the hedges near the playground. But why come back here? After 10 years, why risk returning to the same county? Because it worked, Chen said, joining them. He got away with it. And people like Hayes, they're creatures of habit. They return to what works. A knock at the door made them all jump. Jenny stood there with Michael's latest drawing. This one showed the man in the fedora standing near a door, a specific door, one that Sarah recognized immediately. That's the old service entrance, she said, taking the drawing. It was sealed off years ago during renovations. How would Michael even know about it? Because Hayes has been studying it, Reeves replied. Look at the angle of this drawing. It's from the picnic table where Michael sits. He's been watching Hayes watch the school. Chen was already on his radio, requesting additional surveillance of the sealed entrance. But Sarah was studying another detail in the drawing. A small rectangle in the man's hand that looked like a phone or a camera. That afternoon, while the children were in art class, Sarah and Chen examined the old service entrance. Hidden behind overgrown bushes, they found fresh scrape marks around the door frame. He's been testing it, Chen said, photographing the marks. Checking if it can be opened. Sarah felt sick. The renovations. They just covered the old door with new siding. The actual lock mechanism might still work. Back in the surveillance van, Reeves was reviewing footage from the hidden cameras they'd installed around the school. Hayes appeared in frame after frame, each time positioning himself to observe different areas of the school grounds. But it was what he did while watching that caught her attention. "Look at this," she said, freezing a frame. Hayes was holding something small and black, exactly like the object in Michael's drawing. He's not just watching, he's recording, building a digital blueprint of every school's routine. Sarah thought about Michael, about his ability to capture details that adults missed. "He draws what he sees," she said slowly. "Not just the man, but what the man is doing. Every drawing has been a piece of evidence we didn't know we needed." As if to confirm her words, Jenny appeared at the van's door with another drawing. This one showed the man in the fedora standing next to his van. But Michael had drawn something new, an open back door revealing what looked like computer screens inside. "A mobile surveillance center," Reeves breathed. "That's how he monitors multiple schools at once. We need to move on that van." But when they reached the staff parking lot, the van was gone. Hayes had left early, citing a doctor's appointment. "He's accelerating his timeline," Reeves said, already calling for units to monitor Hayes's house. "He knows something's wrong. Children notice things, and he's realized Michael's been watching him." That night, as Sarah prepared to leave school, she found one final drawing on her desk. The man in the fedora was standing by the old service entrance again. But this time Michael had drawn children's shoes scattered on the ground behind him. Sarah's blood ran cold as she realized what the drawing meant. Hayes wasn't just planning, he was ready. And they were running out of time to stop him. An early morning storm lashed against the windows of the Burlington Police Department as Detective Reeves briefed her team. Lightning flashes illuminated the evidence wall, where Michael's drawings now formed a disturbing timeline of Hayes's activities. "Last night's surveillance confirms our worst fears," she said, pinning up photos from Hayes's house. "He's been moving equipment from his garage to his van. Computer monitors, recording devices, and this," she held up a photo of a small black case. "A signal jammer, capable of disrupting security systems and cell phones." Sarah sat quietly in the corner, thinking about the children's shoes in Michael's last drawing. The image haunted her, not just for what it depicted, but for what it suggested. Hayes was done watching. He was ready to act. "We've identified his pattern," Chen explained, pointing to a map marked with red pins. "He's been working between 5 schools, establishing routines at each one. But Riverside is different. It's the only school where he's been testing entry points, because it's familiar," Reeves added. "He knows the layout from 10 years ago. The renovations might have changed the surface, but the bones of the building are the same." A junior officer burst into the room. "Detective, Hayes just called in sick to all his school jobs. His van's gone, and he's not at his house." The room erupted into activity. Reeves immediately began issuing orders. "I want units at every school he's been working at. Chun, coordinate with school security. Nobody matching his description gets near any of those buildings." Sarah's phone buzzed, a text from Jenny. "Michael just gave me another drawing. You need to see this now." 20 minutes later, Sarah stood in her classroom, staring at Michael's latest work. The drawing showed the man in the fedora, but he wasn't alone. Behind him were 3 small figures, children, near what appeared to be a maintenance van. In the background, Michael had drawn dark storm clouds and rain. "When did he draw this?" Reeves demanded. "This morning, before classes started," Jenny replied. "He was waiting at my office when I arrived." Sarah looked out at the storm raging outside. The weather matched Michael's drawing exactly. "He's not just drawing what he sees anymore," she said quietly. "He's drawing what's about to happen." Reeves was already on her phone, redirecting units. The storm had given Hayes perfect cover, poor visibility. Most people rushing to get indoors, security cameras hampered by the rain. They gathered in the surveillance van, watching monitors showing various points around the school. The rain made everything hazy, transforming familiar shapes into indistinct shadows. There, Chun pointed to a screen. A figure in dark maintenance coveralls was walking near the old service entrance. head down against the rain, fedora pulled low. "That's not Hayes," Reeves said suddenly, leaning closer to the monitor. "The height is wrong. It's a diversion." Before she could finish speaking, alarms began blaring throughout the school. Security systems went dark, screens flickered, and radio communications filled with static. The signal jammer, Chun realized. But where? Sarah was already running toward her classroom. In the chaos of the alarm and the storm, she had noticed something the others had missed. Michael wasn't at his desk. She burst into the classroom to find it empty, but a new drawing lay on Michael's desk. It showed the sealed service entrance, but from the inside, as if the artist was standing in the dark hallway behind it. "He's inside the walls," Sarah breathed into her radio, hoping it could cut through the interference. The old maintenance tunnels. The renovation didn't seal them off, just covered the entrances. Hayes isn't trying to get in. He's already inside. The storm raged on as police units converged on the school. Somewhere in the forgotten spaces between walls, a predator who had waited 10 years was ready to strike again. And somewhere in those same shadows was a child who had seen him coming, who had tried to warn them all along through the only means he had, his drawings. The question now was whether they could decipher the final warning in time. The school's emergency lighting cast an eerie red glow through the hallways as Sarah ran toward the old maintenance wing, Detective Reeves and Officer Chun close behind. The storm's fury masked their footsteps, thunder drowning out everything but the pounding of their hearts. "The original blueprints," Sarah gasped as they ran. The maintenance tunnels were like a web under the old wing. They used them for heating and electrical access before the renovation. "Perfect hiding place," Reeves said grimly. He could have been mapping them for weeks. They reached the sealed entrance. Chun shone his flashlight on the floor, revealing scuff marks in the dust, small sneaker prints alongside larger boot impressions. Michael came willingly, Reeves observed. No signs of struggle, because he knew we'd follow the drawings, Sarah realized. He's been leaving us a trail all along. Behind the sealed door, they discovered that the renovation had been superficial plywood and new siding covering the original entrance. Chun made quick work of it with a crowbar, revealing a dark passage beyond. Their flashlight beams cut through decades of dust, illuminating a network of utility tunnels. The air was thick with the musty smell of abandoned spaces and recent disturbance. "Listen," Sarah whispered. In the distance, barely audible over the storm that raged above, came the soft hum of electronic equipment. They moved silently through the tunnels, following the sound. The passage twisted and branched, but fresh scuff marks in the dust led the way. After what felt like an eternity, they saw a faint blue glow spilling from around a corner. Reeves held up her hand, signaling them to stop. They could hear voices now. "You've been watching me draw you," Michael's voice, calm and clear. "Every day," Hayes replied softly. "Very talented artist, Michael. Very observant. Just like the others were. The other children. From before. Yes, they noticed me too. Children always do. Adults, they train themselves not to see, not to pay attention. But children see everything." Sarah peered around the corner. The tunnel opened into a small maintenance room, now filled with monitors showing security feeds from multiple schools. Hayes sat in front of the displays, Michael beside him, a sketchbook open between them. "Is that why you came back?" Michael asked. "To be seen again?" Hayes laughed softly. "You really are clever. Too clever. That's why." He never finished the sentence. In that moment, several things happened at once. Michael knocked over a bottle of water, shorting out Hayes' equipment. The monitors went dark, plunging the room into chaos. Hayes lunged for something in the shadows, a bag, Sarah realized later, probably containing evidence of his previous crimes. But Michael had already rolled under the desk, exactly as they had planned when he'd approached Jenny that morning, asking to help set a trap. Reeves and Chun burst in, flashlights and weapons trained on Hayes. In the confusion, he tried to reach an exit only he knew about, but found it already blocked by additional officers who had followed the building's original blueprints. "Richard Harrison Hayes," Reeves said, handcuffs glinting in the emergency lights. "You've been seen." Later, in the safety of Sarah's classroom, Michael added one final drawing to the evidence file. The man in the fedora, no longer standing tall, but sitting defeated in the back of a police car. "You knew he was watching you draw him," Sarah said quietly. Michael nodded. He needed to be seen. That's why he kept coming back. But he forgot something important. What's that? Sometimes, being seen is a trap. Outside, the storm was finally beginning to pass. Sunlight broke through the clouds, casting long shadows across the playground, shadows that, for the first time in weeks, held no hidden watchers, no lurking threats. The man in the fedora had wanted to be seen. And in the end, that's exactly what brought him down, seen through the eyes of a child, captured in drawings that became evidence, tracked by adults who finally learned to notice what had been hiding in plain sight all along. Inside Hayes' garage, Detective Reeves moved with deliberate care as she opened a metal filing cabinet that had been concealed behind a false wall. The afternoon light filtering through the dusty windows illuminated decades of meticulously kept records. A historian's treasure trove of horror. 10 schools, she said, leafing through the folders. Not just the 5 we knew about. He'd been working at schools for years before the disappearances started. Sarah stood nearby, watching as forensics teams photographed the walls of maps and surveillance photos. In the harsh light of day, Hayes' planning room looked less like a command center and more like what it truly was, a shrine to obsession. "There's something else," Chun called from the corner. He was examining a laptop they'd found hidden in the ventilation system. School employment records going back to 2005. He didn't just work as maintenance staff. He was a substitute teacher in Ohio before moving here. Sarah felt her blood run cold. He had access to children in 2 different ways. And 2 different identities, Reeves added. Richard Harrison Hayes was his real name used for teaching. But there were others, Richard Henderson, Richard Hayworth. Those were his maintenance identities. In the basement, they found what they'd been dreading. A locked room containing small items, backpacks, shoes, hair ribbons, each carefully labeled with dates and locations. "Trophies," Reeves said quietly. "From all of them. Not just the 5 we knew about." The evidence painted a picture of a predator who had spent years perfecting his method. As a substitute teacher, he learned how schools operated, how security worked, how children behaved. But it was his maintenance jobs that gave him true invisibility, the ability to move unnoticed through school after school. Back at the station, Hayes sat in an interrogation room, his fedora placed on the table before him like a barrier between past and present. "Why come back?" Reeves asked. "After 10 years, why risk returning to the same area?" Hayes smiled faintly. "You assume I ever left." The investigation revealed the terrible truth. He hadn't disappeared after the 5th child. He'd simply moved to other districts, other states, always staying just ahead of suspicion. The fire that destroyed Riverside's personnel records hadn't been an accident. He'd returned periodically over the years, erasing traces of his past employment. The drawings, Sarah said during a late-night briefing. That's what rattled him. Being documented, being truly seen. He got careless, Reeves agreed. Started keeping trophies, staying too long in one place. Classic escalation pattern. As they pieced together Hayes' decades-long trail, families from across the country began receiving the calls they had both dreaded and hoped for. Their children were never coming home, but at least now they would know why. In Sarah's classroom, Michael's drawings had been carefully collected as evidence, each one now a piece of the puzzle that had finally brought Hayes to justice. But one drawing remained, the last one, showing not the predator, but his defeat. "You knew he was watching you draw?" Sarah said to Michael after his parents finished giving their statement to the police. "Someone had to see him," Michael replied simply. "Really see him. The way he wanted to be seen. That's how you catch monsters. You look at them until they can't hide anymore." Outside, maintenance workers were removing Hayes' hedges from around the playground, opening up sight lines, eliminating hiding spots. The school would be different now, more open, more watchful. But as Sarah watched Michael walk away with his parents, she realized something profound. Sometimes the most powerful weapon against darkness isn't a gun or a badge, but the simple, unflinching gaze of a child who refuses to look away. The man in the fedora had finally been seen for what he truly was. And in being seen, he had lost his power to hide in plain sight. 1 year later, Sarah stood at her classroom window, watching children play in the updated playground. The old picnic tables had been replaced with new ones, positioned with clear sight lines to all areas. The sealed maintenance entrances were now permanently filled with concrete, and security cameras covered every angle of the school grounds. But the biggest changes weren't physical. "Ms. Anderson," Michael's voice called from the doorway. Now in 4th grade, he carried his ever-present sketchbook, but its pages were filled with different subjects, landscapes, classmates playing, the new garden the students had planted where Hayes's hedges once stood. "How's the art club going?" Sarah asked, smiling as he showed her his latest work, a bright, detailed drawing of children planting spring flowers. "We're doing an exhibition next week," he said proudly. "Mom says you should come." After Hayes's arrest, Michael's artistic talent had drawn attention from the school board. With their support, Riverside Elementary started an after-school art program, giving children a new way to express what they saw and felt. Michael was its first success story, his observational skills now celebrated rather than carrying the weight of uncovering darkness. Detective Reeves visited occasionally, keeping them updated on the case's ripple effects. Hayes's detailed records had led to solving dozens of cold cases across multiple states. Schools nationwide had revised their maintenance staff protocols, implementing stricter background checks and dual supervision requirements. But today was special. Sarah gathered her 3rd grade class for their weekly safety discussion. Not lectures about strangers, but conversations about trust, observation, and the importance of speaking up. "Remember," she told them, "you all have something special. You notice things adults sometimes miss. That's not scary. That's your superpower. And like all powers, it's meant to help people." In her desk drawer, she kept one of Michael's last drawings of the man in the fedora. Not as a reminder of fear, but as proof that evil couldn't hide forever when enough people were brave enough to really look. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, creating patterns on the classroom floor. Children's laughter drifted in from the playground, no longer haunted by watching eyes. In the parking lot, a new maintenance worker, wearing a bright yellow safety vest instead of a fedora, waved cheerfully at the security camera before beginning his carefully documented rounds. Sarah thought about all the changes the past year had brought. The strengthened community bonds, the increased awareness, the way parents and teachers had learned to really listen to their children. Hayes had left scars on many communities, but in exposing his methods, they had also exposed the cracks he'd exploited, cracks that were now being sealed with vigilance and understanding. Later that afternoon, as Sarah packed up for the day, she noticed something on her desk, a new drawing from Michael. It showed the school as it was now, bright, open, filled with playing children. In the corner, he'd written something that made her smile. "Sometimes the scariest monsters are the ones we pretend not to see, but they can't hide if we all keep looking." She pinned the drawing to her board, a reminder that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means learning, growing, and making sure that what was once hidden in shadow is now seen in full daylight. Outside, the late spring sun painted long shadows across the playground, but they were just shadows now, nothing more, nothing less. The man in the fedora was gone, and in his place was something stronger, a community that had learned to keep its eyes open and its children close. The monsters might still exist in the world, but they would find no shelter here. Not anymore. Not when everyone, especially the children, knew the power of really seeing.